In a quiet corner of Decatur, Georgia, 62-year-old Letitia Williams was about to face the wreckage of a broken family bond. What began as a routine grocery run took a shocking turn when she saw her son, hollow-eyed, humiliated, and clutching her grandson on the curb. Letitia wasn't your typical retired bookkeeper. For years, she'd been the backbone of her family, until one no got her blocked, erased. But when his wife walked out, the silence shattered. Letitia didn't expect forgiveness, but what she did next would change 3 lives and a family forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The phone rang at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, just as Letitia Williams was gathering her art supplies for the watercolor class she'd been anticipating all week. She recognized David's number immediately, the same digits she'd memorized when he was 7 years old and afraid of forgetting his phone number at school. "Mom, I need a huge favor." His voice carried that familiar edge of urgency that had once made her drop everything, no questions asked. "Sarah and I have this dinner tonight with the Hartwell Group. You remember me mentioning them? The account that could change everything for us?" Letitia's hand paused over her paintbrush set. Through her kitchen window, she could see Rosa Martinez watering her garden next door, the evening light catching the silver in her friend's hair. "What do you need, David?" "Can you watch Emma and Lily? Our sitter just canceled. Some family emergency, and this dinner is crucial. I'm talking about a promotion that could set us up for life." The words tumbled out faster now, the way they always did when he was building his case. "I know it's last minute, but you know how important this is." She did know. David had been chasing this promotion for months, working late nights and weekends, missing Emma's soccer games and Lily's dance recitals. The same pattern James used to fall into before his accident. Always one more opportunity, one more step up the ladder that would somehow make everything perfect. "I have plans tonight, David." The words felt strange in her mouth, foreign after decades of rearranging her life around other people's needs. "My art class starts at 6. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. In the background, she could hear Sarah's voice, sharp and insistent, though the words were unclear. "Your art class." David's tone had shifted, becoming the voice she remembered from his teenage years when she'd dared to say no to something he wanted. "Mom, this is a $1,200 a plate dinner. This is my career we're talking about. And this is my life we're talking about." Letitia surprised herself with the steadiness of her voice. She'd been practicing this. Setting boundaries, Rosa called it. Learning to value her own time after 43 years of nursing and 35 years of marriage, followed by 5 years of widowhood spent caring for everyone but herself. "I don't understand." David's voice carried genuine confusion, as if the concept of her having independent plans was incomprehensible. "It's just an art class. Can't you reschedule?" The dismissal in his tone, "just an art class," hit her like a physical blow. She thought of the registration fee she'd paid 3 months in advance, the watercolor techniques she'd been eager to learn, the small group of women who'd become her first real friends since James died. Women who didn't see her as grandmother first, caregiver second, person last. "No, David, I can't reschedule, and I won't." The explosion, when it came, was swift and devastating. "Are you kidding me right now? After everything I've done for you? After I helped you with Dad's funeral, handled all the paperwork, made sure you were okay living alone? This is how you repay me?" Each word landed like a slap. Letitia closed her eyes, remembering those dark months after James's accident. David had helped, yes, but she'd been the one filing insurance claims at midnight, the one sorting through 35 years of accumulated life while drowning in grief. David had handled the important things, the legal documents, the financial arrangements, while she'd faced the devastating intimacy of packing away a lifetime of love. "David, I appreciate what you did after your father died, but nothing. This is selfish, Mom. This is incredibly selfish. Do you know what this dinner means to our family? To Emma and Lily's future?" Before she could respond, she heard the phone change hands. Sarah's voice came through, crisp and cold as winter air. "Letitia, I think you're forgetting what's at stake here. This isn't about you and your hobbies. This is about your granddaughter's college funds, their future opportunities. David's been working himself to the bone for this chance, and frankly, I'm shocked that you'd prioritize painting over their well-being." The words hit their target with surgical precision. Sarah had always known exactly where to press, how to make Letitia feel small and selfish for having needs of her own. For 5 years, she'd endured these subtle attacks, always couched in concern for the family, always delivered with that lawyer's smile that never reached her eyes. "My granddaughter's well-being isn't dependent on one business dinner," Letitia said quietly. "And my choices aren't subject to your approval." She could hear David's voice again, the phone apparently back in his hands. "You know what? Fine, don't help us. But don't expect us to keep calling when you've made it clear where your priorities are. David, please. No, I'm done. I'm done asking you for anything. You want to paint watercolors instead of helping your family? Go ahead, but don't act surprised when we stop including you in ours." The line went dead with a finality that echoed through Letitia's kitchen like a door slamming. She stood there for a long moment, the phone still pressed to her ear, listening to the dial tone that sounded remarkably like the flatline monitors she'd heard too many times during her nursing career. Her hands were shaking as she set the phone down. Through the window, she watched Rosa finish watering her roses, the older woman's movements methodical and peaceful. How many times had Rosa told her that boundaries weren't walls? They were gates that you could choose to open or keep closed. The art supplies lay scattered across her kitchen table, the new watercolor set she'd bought with her birthday money still in its pristine packaging. For a moment, she considered calling David back, apologizing, explaining that she could reschedule after all. The familiar weight of guilt pressed down on her shoulders, 43 years of putting everyone else first. But then she thought of James, and the conversation they'd had 3 weeks before his accident. He'd been watching her iron his shirts while simultaneously helping David with a work presentation over the phone, meal planning for the week, and coordinating Emma and Lily's pickup schedule. "When was the last time you did something just for you?" he'd asked, his voice gentle but concerned. She hadn't been able to answer him then. The question had felt almost foreign, like he was speaking a language she'd forgotten how to understand. Now, standing in her kitchen with her son's angry words still echoing, she finally had an answer. Tonight. Tonight she would do something just for herself. Letitia gathered her art supplies with deliberate care, checking her watch. She had 45 minutes before class started. Enough time to drive to the community center, enough time to choose whether she would let David's anger derail the first thing she'd looked forward to in months. The late afternoon sun slanted through her windows, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. Somewhere across town, David and Sarah were probably scrambling to find another babysitter, their perfect evening disrupted by her unprecedented refusal to sacrifice her plans for theirs. The guilt was there, sharp and familiar, but underneath it was something else, something that felt dangerously like relief. For the first time in decades, she had chosen herself. The knowledge felt both terrifying and exhilarating, like stepping off a cliff and discovering she could fly. As she locked her front door and walked toward her car, Letitia carried with her the echo of David's final words. "Don't expect us to call again." They cut deep, but they also carried an unintended gift, the freedom that came with having nothing left to lose. The community center was only 15 minutes away, but as she drove through the familiar streets of her Chicago suburb, Letitia felt as though she was traveling toward a different life entirely. One where her time had value, where her choices mattered, where being a good mother didn't require the complete erasure of herself. She didn't know yet that David would make good on his threat, that 6 months would pass without a single call or text. She didn't know that this moment, this choice to attend an art class instead of dropping everything for her son, would become the fault line that split her family apart. All she knew was that for the first time in years, she was driving towards something she wanted instead of something she was obligated to do. And despite the pain of David's words, despite the uncertainty of what came next, that felt like the beginning of something important. The watercolors were waiting. Marcus's hand trembled as he reached for the divorce papers spread across his kitchen island. 6 months had passed since that phone call with his mother, 6 months of silence that had felt like victory at first, then indifference, And now, with Sarah's suitcases lined up by the front door, felt like the hollow echo of a life collapsing. The morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Lincoln Park home caught the gold lettering on the legal documents. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words seemed to shift and blur as he read them, his mind struggling to process what Sarah had told him an hour earlier over coffee and croissants, as casually as if she were discussing weekend plans. "I've been seeing Richard for 2 years," she'd said, her voice carrying the same measured tone she used in contract negotiations. "We're ready to make it official." Richard, her business partner, the man who'd sat at their dinner table, who'd played with Emma and Lily in their backyard, who'd shaken David's hand at countless social gatherings while sleeping with his wife. Now Sarah moved through their home with efficient precision, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors as she supervised the movers who were systematically dismantling the life they'd built together. Or the life David had thought they'd built together. "The girls will stay with me during the week," Sarah was saying, her words floating toward him from what used to be their bedroom. "You'll have alternating weekends and 1 evening per week. It's all outlined in Section 4. David stared at the papers, the legal language swimming before his eyes. Joint custody with primary residence. Asset division. Spousal support. The mathematics of a marriage's end, calculated with the same cold precision Sarah brought to her corporate mergers. His phone buzzed with a text from his boss. "How did the Henderson presentation go? Heard you knocked it out of the park." The Henderson presentation. The promotion he'd been chasing for months. The same opportunity that had led to that final conversation with his mother. He'd gotten it, of course. The corner office, the 20% raise, the company car. Everything he'd thought he wanted, achieved just in time to watch everything else crumble. "Daddy?" Emma appeared in the doorway, her 7-year-old face serious and questioning. She wore her school uniform, the private academy that cost more than most people's annual salary, and clutched her pink backpack with both hands. "Are you and Mommy getting a divorce like Madison's parents?" The question hit him like a physical blow. When had Emma learned that word? When had his daughter started carrying the weight of adult knowledge in her careful brown eyes? "Emma, sweetie," David started, but Sarah's voice cut through from the hallway. "Girls, the car is here. Time for school." Lily bounced into the kitchen, her backpack decorated with unicorn stickers, seemingly oblivious to the tension crackling through the house. "Daddy, can we go to Chuck E. Cheese this weekend?" "Emma says we can't because you and Mommy are fighting. But I told her that's silly because grown-ups don't fight about Chuck E. Cheese." David knelt down, trying to find words that wouldn't shatter his daughter's world any further. But Sarah was already there, her hands on both girls' shoulders, steering them toward the door with practiced efficiency. "We'll talk about weekend plans later," Sarah said, her eyes meeting David's over the girls' heads. The look was brief but unmistakable, a warning not to complicate the morning routine with messy emotions. The house felt cavernous after they left. David wandered through rooms that suddenly seemed like museum displays of a life that had never really existed. The family photos on the mantel, carefully staged portraits from expensive studios, stared back at him like evidence of an elaborate performance. His phone rang, and for one wild moment, his heart leaped with the possibility that it might be his mother calling. That somehow she'd sensed his world falling apart and reached across the 6 months of silence to, "David, it's Michael. You sound like hell, man. Everything okay?" Michael Torres, his friend and colleague, the one person at work who knew about the divorce proceedings. The one person who'd tried, months ago, to suggest that maybe David's priorities were getting skewed. "Sarah's moving out today," David heard himself say. "It's really happening. Jesus. I'm sorry, man. You want me to come over? Bring some beer and terrible movies?" David looked around his empty house. The house that would soon be his alone, echoing with the absence of his daughter's laughter, of Sarah's controlled presence, of the family dinners that had felt more like board meetings, but had at least been something. "Michael, can I ask you something?" David's voice cracked slightly. "When you went through your divorce, how did you handle being alone?" The silence on the other end stretched long enough that David wondered if the call had dropped. When Michael finally spoke, his voice was gentler than usual. "I wasn't alone, David. I had my kids, yeah, but I also had my family, my mom, my sisters. They held me together when I couldn't hold myself together." Another pause. "When's the last time you talked to your mother?" The question landed like a punch to the gut. David closed his eyes, remembering his mother's voice 6 months ago, calm and steady as she'd refused to rearrange her life for his convenience. He'd been so angry, so certain that she was being selfish and unreasonable. Now, standing in his empty house with divorce papers scattered across his granite countertops, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he'd been wrong about who was being selfish. Less than generated _story greater than part 3. Parallel loneliness. The auditorium lights dimmed as David fumbled with his phone, switching it to silent mode while the opening notes of Tomorrow from Annie began to play. He'd managed to slip into the back row of Jefferson Elementary's spring musical just as the curtain rose, still wearing his suit from another endless day of meetings that no longer seemed to matter. 3 rows ahead, a familiar figure sat alone, her silver hair catching the stage lights. Letitia. His mother had always attended Emma and Lily's performances, but seeing her here now, separated from him by months of silence and his own stubborn pride, felt like spotting a ghost from a life he'd carelessly thrown away. On stage, Emma stood center left in the orphan chorus, her voice clear and strong as she sang about hoping for better days. Lily bounced slightly on her toes in the back row, her enthusiasm making up for what she lacked in pitch. Both girls wore the same proud expressions they'd always worn when they spotted their grandmother in the audience, but now their eyes searched the crowd with confusion, looking for someone who was there but couldn't acknowledge them. David watched his mother's shoulders rise and fall with careful, controlled breathing. Even from a distance, he could see her hands gripping the program, the same way she used to hold his report cards when he was young, like they contained something precious and fragile. When the final bow came and the auditorium erupted in applause, David saw Letitia stand quickly, gathering her purse and moving toward the exit with practiced efficiency. She was avoiding the lobby, avoiding the chance encounters with other parents, avoiding him. The realization hit him like a physical weight. His mother had become a stranger in her own granddaughters' lives, relegated to secret attendance at their milestones. 2 hours later, David stood in his kitchen staring at twin plates of untouched chicken nuggets. Emma sat at the breakfast bar, methodically coloring in a coloring book, while Lily sprawled on the living room floor surrounded by crayons and what appeared to be a masterpiece involving purple horses and rainbow castles. "Emma, you need to eat something," David said, his voice carrying the edge of exhaustion that had become his constant companion since the divorce. "I'm not hungry." Emma didn't look up from her coloring. "Grandma Letitia always made mac and cheese after our shows. The kind from the box with the powdered cheese, not the fancy kind Mommy makes." The casual mention of his mother's name hit David like a slap. For 6 months, he'd forbidden any discussion of Letitia, treating her absence like a necessary amputation. But children, he was learning, didn't forget love just because adults decided it was inconvenient. "Well, Grandma Letitia isn't here," David said, immediately regretting the harshness in his voice when Emma's coloring stopped abruptly. "Why?" Lily appeared in the doorway, her unicorn pajamas already on despite the early hour. "Why can't we see Grandma anymore? Did she move away like Tommy's grandpa?" David opened his mouth to give them the practiced explanation about grown-up disagreements and complicated situations, but the words died in his throat. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that you threw away their grandmother because she dared to have her own life? "Daddy, are you sad?" Emma had stopped coloring entirely now, her serious brown eyes, so much like his mother's, studying his face with uncomfortable perception. Before David could answer, his phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen, and David grabbed it like a lifeline. "Hey man, just checking in." How was the first weekend flying solo? David glanced at his daughters, Emma still watching him with those knowing eyes, Lily now building what appeared to be a fort out of couch cushions. It's educational. That bad, huh? Listen, why don't I come over? Bring some takeout, help with bedtime. Maria always says an extra pair of hands makes everything easier. You don't have to. David. Michael's voice carried the weight of experience, the authority of someone who'd navigated these waters before. Let me help. That's what friends do. An hour later, Michael sat cross-legged on the living room floor, helping Lily add architectural improvements to her cushion fort, while Emma showed him her coloring book with the enthusiasm she'd been hiding all evening. Your girls are amazing, Michael said quietly as they watched a Disney movie, both children finally settled and fed. They remind me of my Sophia at that age. Resilient, but watchful, you know? They're processing more than they let on. David nodded, exhaustion weighing down his response. I have no idea what I'm doing, Michael. Sarah handled everything. Bedtimes, meals, emotional crises. I was just the fun weekend dad who showed up for soccer games and homework help. You learn. Trust me. You learn. Michael paused, his attention seemingly focused on the movie but his voice carrying careful intention. But David, you don't have to do this alone. These girls, they need their family. All of their family. What's that supposed to mean? Michael turned to face him directly. It means your pride is hurting your daughters. They miss their grandmother, man. I can see it in their faces. The way they keep looking toward the door like they're waiting for someone who's never going to come. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. David felt something crack open in his chest, a fissure he'd been carefully sealing for months. She chose an art class over helping us. Her own son and granddaughters. She chose herself over being taken for granted. There's a difference. Michael's voice was gentle but firm. When's the last time you asked your mother how she was doing? Not what she could do for you, but how she was doing. The question hung in the air between them like an accusation. David tried to remember, searching through months and years of conversations. But every interaction he could recall had centered around his needs, his family's schedule, his requests for help. David, Michael continued, I made the same mistake during my divorce. Pushed away the people who loved me most because I was angry at the world and they were safe targets. Don't let your daughters pay the price for your wounded pride. On screen, animated characters sang about the importance of family, their voices filling the silence David couldn't break. In her cushion fort, Lily had fallen asleep clutching a crayon, while Emma dozed against his arm, her coloring book fallen open to a page where she'd written, I miss Grandma, in careful second-grade letters. The words stared up at him like an indictment, a reminder of everything he'd lost in his determination to be right. Rosa Martinez had learned to read silence the way other people read books, carefully, with attention to subtext and meaning. This particular Tuesday morning silence, as she and Letitia sat on her back patio sharing coffee and watching the sunrise paint her garden in shades of gold, carried the weight of months of accumulated grief. You're thinking about them again, Rosa said, not bothering to make it a question. She'd watched her friend's face during their weekly coffee ritual, had seen the way Letitia's eyes drifted toward her phone whenever a notification chimed, hope and disappointment warring across her features in quick succession. Letitia stirred her coffee slowly, the spoon clinking against ceramic in a rhythm that had become as familiar as a heartbeat. Emma had her spring concert last week. I saw it on the school's Facebook page. Did you go? I sat in the back, left before the reception. Letitia's voice carried the careful neutrality she'd perfected over the past 6 months, the tone of someone who'd learned to armor their heart against their own feelings. She sang beautifully. They both did. Rosa set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. At 58, she'd spent 23 years as a social worker, watching families tear themselves apart over pride and misunderstanding. She'd seen enough broken relationships to recognize the difference between necessary boundaries and self-imposed exile. Letitia, we need to talk. Something in Rosa's tone made Letitia look up sharply. Her friend's face wore the expression she recognized from their conversations about difficult cases. Compassionate but unflinching, the look of someone preparing to deliver uncomfortable truths. I've been your friend for 3 years, Rosa continued, and I've watched you build a beautiful life for yourself. The art classes, the volunteer work at the community center, the book club. You've learned to value yourself, and that's important. But somewhere along the way, you've built walls so high that even love can't climb over them. Letitia felt her defensive mechanisms activate, the same protective instincts that had carried her through 6 months of loneliness disguised as independence. I set boundaries, Rosa. Healthy boundaries. Isn't that what you always told me to do? There's a difference between boundaries and barriers, Mija. Rosa leaned forward, her voice gentle but insistent. Boundaries protect you while still allowing connection. Barriers isolate you completely. Which one are you living behind? The question hit like a physical blow. Letitia thought of her empty house, of holidays spent with Rosa's extended family because her own was forbidden territory, of grandchildren's voices she heard only in dreams. He chose this, Letitia said, but her voice lacked conviction. He cut me off. He blocked my number. And you let him. Rosa's words weren't accusatory, just factual. You had other ways to reach out, through the school, through mutual friends, through showing up at his door. But you chose to let his anger define the entire relationship. Before Letitia could respond, Rosa continued. I see it every day in my work. Families destroyed because everyone's waiting for the other person to make the first move. Pride becomes more important than love, and children pay the price. Meanwhile, across town, Michael Torres was having a similar conversation with David in the break room of their downtown office. The morning rush had subsided, leaving them alone with bitter coffee and the weight of David's obvious exhaustion. You look like hell, Michael said bluntly, studying his friend's face. When's the last time you got a full night's sleep? David rubbed his eyes, thinking of the previous night's battle over bedtime routines, of Lily's tears when she couldn't find her favorite stuffed animal, of Emma's quiet request for Grandma's goodnight song that had nearly broken his heart. It's getting easier, David lied. Bullshit. Michael pulled out his phone, scrolling to a photo from 3 years earlier. You want to know what getting easier actually looks like? The image showed Michael with his own children at a park, all of them laughing at something off camera. But what struck David was the presence of other adults in the background. Michael's mother, his sister, a network of family support that made the joy possible. After my divorce, I was exactly where you are now, Michael said quietly, angry at the world, convinced that asking for help was admitting failure. I pushed away everyone who tried to support me, including my mother. You know what happened? David shook his head. I nearly lost my kids. Not legally, but emotionally. They started pulling away because I was drowning, and drowning people pull down everyone around them. Michael paused, letting the words sink in. It wasn't until I swallowed my pride and called my mom, apologized for being an ass and asked for help, that things started to turn around. This is different, David protested. My mother chose an art class over helping us. Your mother chose herself for once in her life. There's a difference. Michael's voice carried the patience of someone who'd had this realization himself. David, when's the last time you asked your mother about her life? Her interests? Her feelings? When's the last time you treated her like a person instead of a resource? The question echoed Rosa's words from across town, both friends recognizing the same fundamental truth their loved ones couldn't see. David opened his mouth to defend himself, but the words died as memories surfaced unbidden. His mother at James's funeral, holding herself together for everyone else's sake. His mother working double shifts to pay for his college while caring for her own aging parents. His mother celebrating his promotions, his marriage, his children's births with genuine joy, never mentioning her own sacrifices or needs. She was always just there, David said slowly, the realization dawning like sunrise after a long night. I never thought about what she might want for herself. And now she's not there, and your daughters are asking questions you can't answer. Michael leaned back in his chair. Pride's expensive, David. Sometimes it costs more than we can afford to pay. At the same moment, Rosa was reaching across her patio table to take Letitia's hand. That little boy who used to bring you dandelions and call them flowers, he's still in there, Letitia, buried under hurt and pride and poor choices, but still there. The question is, are you going to let your wounded feelings keep you from your granddaughters' lives? Both conversations ended in silence, two friends planting seeds of wisdom in ground that had been hardened by months of stubborn grief. Across the city, two hearts began the slow work of considering whether love might be worth the risk of reaching out first. The morning sun climbed higher, casting new light on old wounds, and somewhere in that light, the possibility of healing began to take root. The call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Thursday, piercing through David's restless sleep like a siren. He'd been dreaming of his father again, one of those vivid dreams where James felt so real that waking up was like losing him all over again. David fumbled for his phone, squinting at the unknown number flashing on the screen. Mr. Williams? This is Dr. Sarah Chen at Children's Memorial Hospital. I'm calling about your daughter Emma. The words hit him like ice water. David shot upright, his heart hammering against his ribs as fragments of medical terminology washed over him. Pneumonia. Respiratory distress. Emergency admission. The night shift nurse's voice was professional but urgent, and through her clinical explanations, one phrase echoed with terrifying clarity. You need to come now. David's hands shook as he threw on clothes, his mind racing through a checklist he'd never had to consider. Who was Emma's pediatrician again? What medications was she allergic to? Did she have any underlying conditions he should know about? The questions multiplied faster than he could process them, each one a reminder of how little he actually knew about his daughter's daily lives. The hospital corridors smelled of disinfectant and fear, the fluorescent lights casting everything in harsh, unforgiving whites. Emma looked impossibly small in the pediatric bed, oxygen tubes running into her nose, her face flushed with fever. Lily sat in a chair beside her sister, still wearing her unicorn pajamas, her eyes wide with the kind of terror that only children can feel when their world suddenly becomes unfamiliar and scary. Daddy! Lily launched herself into his arms the moment she saw him, her small body trembling. Emma can't breathe right. The ambulance people came, and everything was loud and scary and... Shh, baby, it's okay. David held her close, but his eyes were fixed on Emma, who looked at him with a mixture of relief and something that might have been disappointment. Dr. Chen approached with Emma's chart, her expression serious but not panicked. Emma's stable now, but she developed pneumonia quite rapidly. Her temperature spiked to 104, and she was having difficulty breathing. We've got her on antibiotics and oxygen, but I need to ask you some questions about her medical history. The questions came in a rapid-fire sequence that exposed every gap in David's knowledge. Emma's vaccination records. Sarah had always handled those. Previous respiratory issues. He couldn't remember any, but maybe there had been some. Allergies to medications. Wasn't there something about penicillin, or was that Lily? I don't know, David found himself saying repeatedly, each admission feeling like a failure. My ex-wife usually handles the medical stuff. I can call her, but she's in Boston on business and... Daddy, I want Grandma Letitia. Emma's voice was small and hoarse, barely audible over the hum of medical equipment. She always knows what to do when I'm sick. The words hit David like a physical blow. His mother had been a nurse for over 20 years. She would know Emma's medical history, would know exactly what questions to ask, would know how to comfort a scared 7-year-old in ways that David was obviously failing to do. Dr. Chen's pager buzzed, and she glanced at it with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to medical emergencies. Mr. Williams, I need you to contact whoever has Emma's complete medical records. We need to know about any previous respiratory issues, her full vaccination history, and any medications she's taken in the past 6 months. As the doctor moved on to her next patient, David stood in the hallway, feeling more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life. His phone showed 17 missed calls from Sarah, but she was 3 time zones away and wouldn't be able to catch a flight until morning. Emma needed help now, needed someone who knew her history, her fears, her comfort routines. Someone like his mother. David stared at his phone for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the contacts list. Letitia's number was still there, though it had been 6 months since he'd used it. 6 months since he'd blocked her number in a fit of wounded pride. 6 months since he'd declared that he was done asking her for anything. The first call went straight to voicemail. Of course it did. It was nearly 3 a.m., and he was calling from a number she probably had blocked. The sound of her voice on the recorded greeting made something crack open in his chest, the familiar warmth of her tone a sharp contrast to the sterile coldness of the hospital. "Mom, it's David. Emma's in the hospital with pneumonia, and I need help. I don't know her medical history, and the doctors are asking questions I can't answer. We're at Children's Memorial, room 314. Please, if you get this message." He hung up and immediately called again and again, each voicemail message becoming more desperate, more raw. By the fourth call, he was no longer trying to maintain any pretense of dignity. "Mom, please. I know I messed up. I know I said terrible things, but Emma is asking for you. And I don't know what I'm doing. I never knew what I was doing. Please call me back." The phone rang in his hand, and David's heart leaped until he saw Sarah's number on the screen. "David, I got your messages. How is she? I'm trying to get on the earliest flight, but she's stable, but the doctors need her medical history. Do you have her vaccination records? Any previous respiratory issues? Medication allergies?" As Sarah rattled off information that David scrambled to write down, he felt the weight of his own inadequacy settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat. He was Emma and Lily's father, but in this moment of crisis he felt like little more than a visitor in their lives. "David, there's something else." Sarah's voice carried a note of hesitation. "Emma's had respiratory issues before. Mild asthma that we managed with an inhaler. It's in her file with Dr. Martinez, but also, your mother knows about it. She was the one who first noticed the symptoms during one of her babysitting days." Of course she was. Of course his mother, with her nurse's training and grandmother's intuition, had been the one to spot something that David had missed entirely. After hanging up with Sarah, David returned to Emma's room to find his daughter sleeping fitfully, her small hand clutching Lily's stuffed elephant. Lily had fallen asleep in the chair, her head tilted at an angle that would give her a crick in her neck. David's phone buzzed with a text message, and his heart stopped when he saw his mother's name on the screen. "On my way." 2 words. No questions, no recriminations, no demands for apology or explanation. Just the simple, immediate response of a grandmother who would drop everything for her grandchild, regardless of the months of silence that lay between them. David closed his eyes and felt something he hadn't experienced in months, relief that he wasn't facing this alone. His mother was coming, and somehow, that made everything seem slightly less impossible. Letitia arrived at Children's Memorial Hospital at 3:42 a.m., still wearing the paint-stained sweatshirt she'd thrown on over her nightgown. Her silver hair was uncombed, her face bare of makeup, but her hands were steady as she approached the nurse's station with the quiet authority of someone who'd spent decades in hospital corridors. "Emma Williams, room 314, she said to the night nurse, who looked up from her computer with tired eyes. "Are you family?" "I'm her grandmother." The words came out strong and clear, a declaration that transcended months of silence and wounded pride. "And I'm a registered nurse. 23 years at Northwestern Memorial." The nurse's expression softened with recognition, one healthcare professional acknowledging another. "3rd floor, take the elevator to your right." Dr. Chen left instructions that family could visit anytime. Letitia found David pacing the hallway outside Emma's room like a caged animal. He looked haggard, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled from hours of worry. When he saw her, something crumbled in his face, the carefully constructed walls of 6 months collapsing in an instant. "Mom, Later," Letitia said quietly, her voice carrying the same gentle firmness she'd used when he was 7 years old and had scraped his knee. "Right now, let me see my granddaughter." She moved past him into the room, her trained eye taking in Emma's condition with quick efficiency. Oxygen saturation levels, respiratory rate, the color in her cheeks, all the clinical markers that told a story David couldn't read. But more than that, she saw the way Emma's face lit up despite her illness, the way her small hand reached out automatically. "Grandma Letitia, you came," Emma whispered, her voice hoarse but filled with relief that was almost tangible. "Of course I came. Am I, amor?" Letitia took Emma's hand, feeling the familiar weight of being needed, being wanted, being loved without condition. Grandmas always come when their babies need them. In the chair beside the bed, Lily stirred awake, blinking in confusion before her face broke into a smile that could have powered the entire hospital. "Grandma, I knew you'd come. I told Emma you would, but she wasn't sure because Daddy said..." "Shh, little one." Letitia reached over to smooth Lily's hair, gathering both granddaughters into her sphere of calm competence. "I'm here now. That's what matters." David watched from the doorway, witnessing something he'd forgotten in his months of anger. The way his mother transformed crisis into comfort, the way her presence made everything feel manageable. She was checking Emma's breathing with subtle, practiced movements, asking gentle questions about symptoms, while simultaneously reassuring both girls that everything would be okay. "Dr. Chen needs Emma's complete medical history," David said finally, his voice smaller than he'd intended. "I didn't know about the asthma, about her previous respiratory issues. I didn't know any of it." Letitia looked at him then, really looked at him, and David saw something in her eyes he hadn't expected. Not anger or judgment, but sadness. The kind of sadness that came from watching someone you love make unnecessary mistakes. "She had her first asthma episode when she was 4, Letitia said quietly. "It was during one of my babysitting days. You and Sarah were at that conference in Denver. I took her to urgent care, stayed with her through the night, made sure she got the right medication. I tried to tell you about it when you got back, but you were so busy catching up on work." The memory hit David like a physical blow. He could picture it now, his mother trying to explain something important while he half listened, his attention divided between his phone and his laptop, treating her words like background noise. "I kept detailed records," Letitia continued, pulling a small notebook from her purse. David recognized it, the same type of composition book she'd used to track his childhood illnesses, his school activities, every important detail of his life. Medication reactions, doctor visits, growth milestones. "I have everything Dr. Chen needs." As his mother spoke with the medical team, translating Emma's history with the precision of someone who'd been paying attention all along, David felt the full weight of what he'd thrown away. Not just his mother's help, but her love, her knowledge, her irreplaceable presence in his daughters' lives. The sun was beginning to rise outside Emma's window when Dr. Chen finally declared that Emma was stable and improving. The antibiotics were working, her fever was dropping, and with proper rest, she should be able to go home in a day or two. "You did the right thing, bringing her in when you did. Drive," Chen told David, but her eyes moved to Letitia with professional respect. And having someone with her complete medical history made all the difference in her treatment plan. As the medical team dispersed and the morning shift took over, David found himself alone in the hallway with his mother for the first time in 6 months. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that had been said and left unsaid. "Mom," David began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he needed to apologize for. "I know," Letitia said simply. "I know you're sorry. I know you were hurting and angry and scared. I know all of that, David. But I hurt you. I kept the girls from you. I threw away everything because I was too proud to. You were protecting your wounded heart the only way you knew how." Letitia's voice was gentle but firm. "But David, your girls needed their grandmother, and I needed them too. We all lost so much time." David felt tears he'd been holding back for months finally break free. "I don't know how to fix this, Mom. I don't know how to be the father they need, the son you deserve. I've made such a mess of everything." Letitia reached out and touched his face, the same gesture she'd used to comfort him as a child. "We fix it one day at a time, Mijo. One choice at a time. Starting now." Through the window of Emma's room, they could see their granddaughter sleeping peacefully, Lily curled up in the chair, while Emma rested more easily than she had all night. The sight of them, safe, loved, surrounded by family, felt like a promise of healing that extended far beyond medicine. The watercolors could wait. This was what mattered most. 3 weeks after Emma's hospital stay, David stood in his mother's kitchen, watching her teach Lily how to fold empanadas, their hands working together in the familiar rhythm of a tradition passed down through generations. The scene felt both foreign and achingly familiar. Foreign because it had been so long since he'd witnessed his mother's quiet joy in teaching. Familiar because it awakened memories of his own childhood afternoons spent learning the same skills at this same counter. Like this, Grandma? Lily held up her attempt, dough pinched together in an approximation of the perfect crescent shape Letitia had demonstrated. Perfect, am I, amor? You're a natural. Letitia's smile was genuine, unmarked by the careful guardedness that had characterized their first tentative interactions after the hospital. Your bisabuela would be so proud to see you learning her recipe. Emma sat at the kitchen table, still recovering but insistent on participating, carefully spooning, filling into dough circles with the concentrated precision she brought to everything. The mild asthma episode had left her more cautious, but no less determined. And David marveled at how quickly she'd settled back into the comfort of her grandmother's presence. Dad, can you help me reach the salt? Emma asked, her voice still slightly hoarse but stronger each day. The simple request hit David unexpectedly hard. In the past 3 weeks, he'd noticed how naturally his daughters had slipped back into calling him Dad instead of Daddy. A subtle shift that spoke to their growing comfort with his more consistent presence in their daily lives. The divorce had forced him to become more than a weekend visitor, and while the learning curve was steep, moments like this made him feel like he was finally becoming the father they needed. Rosa, come meet my son, Letitia called toward the back door where her friend was tending to the herb garden they'd planted together. David, this is Rosa Martinez. She's heard a lot about you. Rosa appeared in the doorway, wiping dirt from her hands on a small towel, her assessment of David both quick and thorough. She was smaller than David had expected, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. The kind of person who clearly didn't suffer fools but radiated warmth for those she deemed worthy of it. So you're the boy who made my friend cry for 6 months, Rosa said, her tone conversational but pointed. Rosa, Letitia warned gently, but David held up a hand. No, she's right. David met Rosa's gaze directly. I was angry and selfish, and I hurt everyone who mattered most to me. I'm trying to do better. Rosa studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. A small gesture that felt like acceptance, or at least the possibility of it. Good. Your mother is a treasure. And your daughters need their family. All of their family. Rosa's been my voice of reason, Letitia said, moving to the stove to check on the empanadas they'd put in the oven earlier. She's the one who finally convinced me that walls and boundaries aren't the same thing. David looked between the two women, understanding passing between them like a shared language. He thought of Michael's similar words, of all the people who'd tried to tell him that pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. Speaking of family, David said, his voice carefully casual, Sarah wants to arrange a time to talk with you, Mom. About the girls' schedule, medical information, that kind of thing. Letitia's hands stilled for just a moment before she resumed stirring. The divorce had created complicated logistics that required adult conversations and careful coordination. Territory none of them had navigated before. That would be good, Letitia said finally. I want what's best for Emma and Lily, and that means all the adults in their lives need to communicate. It was such a mature, measured response that David felt a flash of shame at how differently he might have handled the same situation 6 months ago. His mother had always been the grown-up in their relationship, but he was finally beginning to understand what that had cost her. Mom, can I ask you something? David found himself saying as Rosa helped the girls set the table. That night, the art class night, were you happy? I mean, when you got there, was it worth it? Letitia considered the question, her face thoughtful. I was terrified, she said finally. I kept thinking I should turn around, go home, call you, and apologize. But when I walked into that room and saw all those women my age trying something new, being brave together, yes, David, it was worth it. She paused, choosing her words carefully. For 43 years, I defined myself by how well I took care of other people. I was a good nurse, a good wife, a good mother, but I'd forgotten how to be just Letitia, to have dreams and interests that belonged only to me. I never wanted you to stop being yourself, David said quietly. You didn't know there was a self to stop, Letitia replied, not unkindly. Because I never showed you. I never set boundaries or asked for space, or demanded to be seen as a complete person. That wasn't your fault, Mijo, but it wasn't sustainable either. The oven timer chimed, and Letitia moved to pull out the golden empanadas, the familiar smell filling the kitchen with warmth and comfort. Emma and Lily cheered at the sight of their handiwork, their pride in the simple accomplishment infectious. These look restaurant quality, David said, genuinely impressed. When did you two become such talented chefs? Grandma says cooking is love you can taste, Lily announced proudly, and that every family recipe carries memories. David looked at his mother, seeing her clearly perhaps for the first time in years. Not as the infinitely patient woman who existed to serve his needs, but as Letitia Williams, who painted watercolors on Thursday evenings and grew herbs with her best friend, and carried forward traditions that connected his daughters to their heritage. Will you teach me too? He asked impulsively. The empanadas, I mean. And whatever else you want to share. Letitia's smile was radiant, transforming her face with joy that seemed to light the entire kitchen. I'd love that, David. I'd love that very much. As they sat down to eat together, 4 generations of love and learning and slowly healing wounds, David felt something shift in his chest. The sharp edges of his anger had been worn smooth by crisis and humility, replaced by something more sustainable: gratitude. The work of rebuilding trust would take time, but they were taking the first small steps together. And for now, that was enough. The August heat shimmered off the pavement as David pulled into the community center parking lot, Emma and Lily bouncing excitedly in the back seat. It was Thursday evening, watercolor class night, and for the first time in the year since his mother had started attending, David was joining her. Remember, girls, this is Grandma's special time, David said as they walked toward the building. We're guests in her world today. Emma nodded solemnly, clutching the art supplies David had bought her, a beginner's set that paled in comparison to the professional-grade materials his mother now carried. Lily skipped ahead, her enthusiasm undimmed by any sense of artistic inadequacy. The community center classroom buzzed with the cheerful chatter of a dozen women, ranging in age from their late 50s to early 80s. David felt conspicuously out of place, the only man in a room full of grandmothers, and clearly the youngest person present by at least 15 years. Everyone, I'd like you to meet my son David and my granddaughters Emma and Lily, Letitia announced, her voice carrying a pride that made David's chest tighten with emotion. They're joining us today. The women welcomed them with the easy warmth of a group that had bonded over shared vulnerability and creative discovery. Mrs. Chen, drive. Chen's mother, as it turned out, showed Emma how to prepare her palette. Margaret Foster, a retired teacher, helped Lily arrange her brushes by size. Within minutes, David found himself seated between his daughters, feeling oddly protective of this space his mother had carved out for herself. Now don't expect miracles, warned their instructor, Mrs. Patricia Reeves, a woman in her 70s, whose own paintings hung around the room like windows into worlds of impossible beauty. Watercolors are unforgiving. They do what they want, when they want, and your job is to dance with them, not control them. David thought of his corporate life, where control was everything: quarterly projections, strategic planning, managing outcomes through careful manipulation of variables. The idea of surrendering to a medium that refused to be managed felt both terrifying and oddly liberating. What are we painting today? Emma asked, her voice carrying the careful politeness she reserved for new adult situations. Sunflowers, Mrs. Reeves announced. Because August is their time to shine. and because they're forgiving subjects for beginners. They want to be bright and cheerful and a little wild, just like we do. David watched his mother work, her movements confident and fluid after a year of practice. Her sunflowers bloomed across the paper with loose, expressive strokes that captured something essential about the flowers, without worrying about perfect representation. She'd found her artistic voice, he realized, bold and warm and unafraid of imperfection. His own attempts were disastrous. The yellow ran into the green, creating muddy brown pools where bright petals should have been. His brush control was heavy-handed, more suited to house painting than delicate artistry. Beside him, Emma worked with careful precision, her flowers tight and controlled but recognizably floral. Lily had abandoned any pretense of realism, creating something that looked more like a celebration than a sunflower, all joy and movement in brilliant, chaotic color. "You're thinking too hard," his mother said quietly, moving to stand behind his chair. "Feel the flower instead of analyzing it. What does happiness look like when it grows toward the sun?" Her hand covered his, guiding his brush in looser, more confident strokes. Under her guidance, David felt something shift, a release of the need to be perfect, to control every outcome. The sunflower that emerged wasn't realistic, but it was alive with movement and light. "Better," Letitia murmured. "Art isn't about making things look right. It's about making things feel true." Around them, the other women worked in companionable silence, occasionally offering gentle suggestions or admiring each other's progress. David began to understand what his mother had found here, not just an outlet for creativity, but a community of women who were redefining themselves beyond their traditional roles. Grandmothers who were also artists. Caregivers who were also creators. Women who had spent decades nurturing others and were finally learning to nurture themselves. "Grandma, yours is beautiful," Emma said, studying Letitia's painting with serious appreciation. "It looks like it's moving in the wind." "Thank you, mi amor. But look at yours. See how careful and detailed it is? That's your own style emerging. Art isn't about copying what other people do. It's about finding your own way of seeing the world." David felt a stab of recognition. How many times had he tried to make Emma and Lily fit his vision of what they should be, instead of celebrating who they actually were? How many times had he done the same thing to his mother? "Mr. David," called Mrs. Foster from across the room, "you should bring the girls more often. Children see color differently than adults. They're not afraid of making mistakes." "Maybe we will," David said, surprising himself. "If my mom doesn't mind sharing her space." Letitia looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "This could be our thing," she said quietly. "Something we do together. All of us." The idea felt revolutionary, a complete reversal of their old dynamic where she gave up her interests to accommodate his needs. Now he was being invited into her world, asked to meet her where she was instead of expecting her to come to him. As the class wound down and they cleaned their brushes, David found himself studying the paintings that lined the walls, a year's worth of his mother's artistic journey. Landscapes and still lifes, portraits and abstracts, each one signed L. Williams in confident script, evidence of a life being lived fully, of dreams pursued without apology. "Mom," he said as they gathered their supplies, "I'm proud of you, for all of this, for finding yourself after everything you've been through." Letitia paused in packing her art case, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, Mijo. That means more than you know." Walking to their cars in the golden August evening, Emma and Lily chattering excitedly about their paintings, David felt something settle in his chest, a peace he hadn't experienced in years. He was learning to be part of his mother's life instead of expecting her to revolve around his. And in that learning, he was discovering not just who she really was, but who he could become. The sunflowers would dry overnight, their imperfect beauty preserved in watercolor and memory. But the real masterpiece was this: a family learning to create something new together, one brushstroke at a time. December arrived in Chicago, with the kind of bitter cold that turned breath into clouds and made every step outside feel like a small act of courage. David stood at his kitchen window, watching snow accumulate on the fire escape, thinking about how much his life had changed since that first snowfall after his divorce. The house no longer felt empty. Emma and Lily's artwork covered the refrigerator. Their school schedules dominated his calendar, and most surprisingly, his mother's presence had become a cornerstone of their rebuilt routine. The doorbell rang at exactly 4:30 p.m., punctual as always. David opened it to find Letitia bundling Emma and Lily into the hallway, all three of them pink-cheeked from the cold and chattering about their afternoon at the art museum. "Daddy, we saw a painting that was bigger than our whole living room," Lily announced, launching herself into his arms with the enthusiasm she brought to everything. "And Grandma knew the artist's name and when he painted it and everything." "Claude Monet," Emma added with the precise pronunciation she'd clearly been practicing. "He painted water lilies over and over because he wanted to capture how light changes during different times of day. Grandma says that's what artists do. They keep trying to show the truth about beautiful things." David helped them out of their winter coats, marveling at how naturally educational outings had become part of their routine. 6 months ago, he would have considered an art museum visit boring or impractical. Now he found himself genuinely curious about what they'd seen, what had captured their imagination. "How was your day?" Letitia asked, settling into the kitchen chair that had somehow become hers during their weekly dinner routine. She looked different than she had a year ago, more confident, more at ease in her own skin. The art classes, the volunteer work at the community center, the book club she'd joined, all of it had added layers to her identity that David was still discovering. "Long," David admitted, loosening his tie. "The Henderson account is demanding a complete restructuring of their marketing strategy, and honestly, I'm not sure it's worth the headache anymore." Letitia raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't sound like the ambitious son I raised. You used to thrive on impossible clients." David paused in his preparation of their weekly taco dinner, another tradition that had emerged organically from their attempts to rebuild family rituals. "I used to think career success was the only thing that mattered. That if I just worked hard enough, climbed high enough, everything else would fall into place. And now? Now I realize I was climbing a ladder that was leaning against the wrong wall." David began heating oil in the pan, muscle memory from months of cooking lessons with his mother guiding his movements. "Emma had a panic attack at school last week. Did I tell you that?" Letitia's attention sharpened immediately. "No, you didn't. What happened?" "Math test anxiety. The school counselor called it, but when I talked to Emma about it, she said she was worried about disappointing me, the way she'd disappointed Sarah when she got a B+ on her last report card." David's voice tightened. "She's 7 years old, Mom. 7. And she's already learned that love is conditional on performance." The kitchen fell quiet except for the sizzle of onions in the pan. In the living room, they could hear Emma and Lily arguing good-naturedly about which movie to watch, their voices carrying the easy security of children who knew they were safe and loved. "What did you tell her?" Letitia asked gently. "I told her that I love her no matter what grades she gets, no matter what mistakes she makes, no matter what. And then I realized I needed to start showing her that instead of just saying it." David stirred the onions, thinking, "I turned down the promotion last week." Letitia's spoon clinked against her coffee cup. "David, you've been working toward that position for 2 years. I was working toward a life that didn't have room for the people I actually want to spend time with." David turned to face his mother directly. The promotion would have meant 60-hour weeks, constant travel, missing more school plays and soccer games and bedtime stories. For what? More money to buy things that don't matter? A corner office I'd barely have time to sit in? What does Sarah think about this decision? David smiled ruefully. "Sarah thinks I've lost my mind. She called it professional suicide and suggested I might be having some kind of midlife crisis. But you know what? Maybe I am. Maybe realizing that my daughters need their father more than they need a bigger trust fund is exactly the kind of crisis I should be having." Before Letitia could respond, Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Dad, can you help me with my science project? It's about plant growth, and I want to do something with sunflowers like we painted in art class." "Of course, sweetheart. What's your hypothesis?" "I want to test whether plants grow better when people talk to them nicely, or when they just ignore them. Emma's face was serious, her scientific curiosity endearing in its earnestness. Grandma says plants can feel love, but I want to prove it with data. David looked at his mother, seeing her quiet smile at Emma's unconscious fusion of emotional intuition and scientific method. That sounds like an excellent experiment. We'll need to set up controlled conditions, measure growth rates, document variables. Can Grandma help too? She knows about growing things. If she wants to, David said, his eyes meeting his mother's. Though fair warning, scientific experiments require a lot of patience and careful observation. I think I can manage that, Letitia said dryly. I did raise you after all. Later, after dinner had been eaten and homework completed, after Lily had been convinced that brushing teeth was non-negotiable, and Emma's worries about tomorrow's spelling test had been soothed, David found himself sitting in his living room with his mother, sharing a quiet moment while the girls watched a movie. Can I ask you something? David said, his voice low enough not to disturb the children. Do you ever regret it? That night when you chose the art class? When you finally said no to dropping everything for me? Letitia considered the question, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. I regret how much pain it caused. I regret that we lost those months, that Emma and Lily had to navigate their parents' divorce without their grandmother's support. But do I regret finally choosing myself? No, David, I don't. Why not? Because if I hadn't, I never would have learned who I was beyond being your mother, your father's wife, everyone's caregiver. And if I'd never learned that, I couldn't have come back to this relationship as a whole person. She paused, looking at her granddaughters absorbed in their movie. Emma and Lily don't need a grandmother who disappears into other people's needs. They need someone who can show them what it looks like to have boundaries, to pursue dreams, to value yourself enough to ask for what you need. David nodded slowly. I'm still learning that lesson. About valuing myself, I mean. For years, I thought my worth came from how much I achieved, how much I provided, how perfectly I could manage everyone's expectations. And now? Now I'm trying to figure out who I am when I'm not performing for anyone. When I'm just David. Just their dad. Just your son. He smiled self-consciously. It's harder than it sounds. The hardest work always is, Letitia said softly. But it's also the most important. On screen, the movie's credits began to roll, and Emma turned around with the sleepy contentment of a child whose day had been full of small adventures and quiet security. Dad, will you read to us tonight? The chapter where Matilda discovers she has powers? Of course. David stood, ruffling Emma's hair as he passed. Go get ready for bed, both of you. I'll be up in 5 minutes. As the girls thundered up the stairs, their energy somehow undiminished despite the late hour, David turned back to his mother. Thank you, Mom. For coming back. For forgiving me. For showing me that it's possible to change. We all showed each other that, Letitia corrected gently. This healing, this growth. It wasn't something I did for you or you did for me. It was something we chose to do together. She gathered her purse and coat, preparing for the short drive to her own house. The house that now felt like home again rather than just a place to sleep between obligations to other people. Same time next week? David asked, though they both knew the answer. These weekly dinners had become as essential as breathing, a rhythm that anchored all of their weeks. Wouldn't miss it. And David, I'm proud of the father you're becoming. Your girls are lucky to have you figuring this out now, while they're still young enough to benefit from all this growth. After she left, David climbed the stairs to read bedtime stories, his heart full of a contentment he'd never experienced during his years of relentless ambition. In Emma's room, both girls waited under covers, their faces clean and expectant. Dad, Emma said as he opened their well-worn copy of Matilda. I'm glad you don't work so much anymore. It's better when you're here. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. As he read about a little girl who discovered her own power and learned to stand up for herself and others, David thought about the year that had passed since that angry phone call in his kitchen. How much they'd all lost, how much they'd all gained, how the work of loving each other, really loving each other, not just performing love, required constant attention and regular course corrections. Outside, snow continued to fall on the Chicago suburb where he'd grown up, where his mother had chosen to bloom late in life, where his daughters were learning that they were worthy of love simply for existing. It was the same place it had always been, but somehow, everything had changed. The watercolors still waited every Thursday evening, but now they were shared. The empanadas still carried forward tradition, but now David's hands helped shape them. The bedtime stories still soothed worried minds, but now they were told by a father who had time to truly listen to his daughter's fears and dreams. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was a real one, and for the first time in years that felt like enough. As Emma and Lily drifted off to sleep, David sat in the hallway between their rooms, listening to their quiet breathing and thinking about tomorrow's ordinary miracles. Breakfast conversations, after-school stories, the simple presence that had once seemed so impossible to maintain. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Thank you for a lovely evening. Emma's science project is going to be wonderful, just like her father's journey toward understanding what really grows in love." David smiled, typing back, "See you Thursday for art class. I'm finally ready to let my sunflowers be imperfect." The response came quickly. The best ones always are. Outside, Chicago slept under its blanket of snow, and inside, a family that had learned to break and heal and grow continued the quiet work of loving each other well, one day at a time. 2 years later, the community center buzzed with pre-exhibition energy as Letitia Williams hung her latest watercolor alongside those of her classmates. The annual student showcase had grown from a modest display in the hallway to a proper gallery event, complete with wine and cheese, printed programs, and visitors from throughout the neighborhood. "Grandma, your painting is the most beautiful one here," Emma declared with the fierce loyalty of a 9-year-old who had appointed herself her grandmother's chief advocate. She stood before Letitia's latest work, a complex piece depicting their family's weekly taco dinner, rendered in loose, confident strokes that captured not just the scene, but the feeling of it. "Each painting here is beautiful in its own way, mi amor," Letitia replied, but her smile betrayed her pleasure at Emma's praise. "Art isn't a competition. It's a conversation." David approached carrying 2 cups of the community center's notoriously strong coffee, taking in the transformation of the space he'd first entered with such reluctance 2 years ago. Now it felt familiar, welcoming, a place where he'd learned that vulnerability could be a strength rather than a weakness. "Mrs. Chen sold 3 paintings already," he reported, handing Letitia her coffee. "And Margaret has people lined up asking about her landscapes. You were right about this community. They've been hungry for something real." The exhibition represented more than just artistic achievement. Over the past year, Letitia had become something of a community organizer, using her nursing background and newfound confidence to advocate for expanded programming at the center. Art therapy for grieving widows, intergenerational cooking classes, a community garden that had transformed a vacant lot into a gathering space for neighbors who'd never spoken before. "Letitia Williams?" a voice called from across the room. They turned to see a woman in her 30s, professionally dressed, approaching with purpose. "I'm Jennifer Martinez, from the Tribune's community section. I'd love to interview you about your work here, both the art and the programming you've developed." David watched his mother's face cycle through surprise, pleasure, and a hint of the old uncertainty, before settling into gracious confidence. "I'd be happy to talk with you, but I think you should know that none of this happened in isolation. Community work is always collaborative." As Letitia moved away to speak with the reporter, David felt a familiar swell of pride, mixed with wonder. When had his mother become this person? Poised, articulate, comfortable, being recognized for her contributions. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but through hundreds of small choices to show up, to speak up, to claim space in the world. "Dad, look at this one," Lily called from across the room, her voice carrying that 8-year-old enthusiasm that could make anything seem miraculous. She stood before a painting by one of the older students, a woman in her 70s who had started painting after her husband's death. The piece showed a garden in full bloom, vibrant with life and possibility. "It's beautiful," David agreed, studying the bold colors and expressive brushwork. "What do you see in it?" "I see someone who is sad but decided to make something happy anyway," Lily said with the matter-of-fact wisdom that children sometimes possessed. Like Grandma did, like you did too after you and Mommy got divorced. The observation hit David with unexpected force. Children, he'd learned, were remarkably adept at identifying emotional truths that adults tried to complicate or avoid. Lily had witnessed their families breaking and rebuilding with clear eyes, understanding intuitively what had taken him months of therapy and painful self-reflection to grasp. "You're right," David said quietly. "Sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the hardest experiences." "Is that why you and Mommy are friends now? Because you both learned how to make beautiful things from sad things?" David glanced across the room to where Sarah stood examining a watercolor with genuine interest. His ex-wife had surprised everyone by not only attending the exhibition, but bringing her new husband Richard, a development that might have devastated David 2 years ago, but now felt like evidence of everyone's capacity for growth and change. The divorce had been finalized 18 months ago, but the real work of creating a functional co-parenting relationship had taken much longer. Mediation sessions, family therapy, countless conversations about schedules and boundaries and what was best for Emma and Lily. Sarah's initial anger at David's refusal to prioritize career advancement had gradually given way to grudging respect for his commitment to active fatherhood. "Your mom looks happy," Sarah said, approaching with Richard at her side. She nodded toward Letitia, who was animatedly discussing community garden logistics with a group of interested neighbors. "I owe her an apology. I never understood what she was trying to tell us about balance and self-care." "She'd probably tell you that understanding it now is what matters," David replied. The conversation felt surreal, civil, even warm, with the woman who had once accused him of throwing away their family's future for sentiment. "How are you adjusting to the new schedule?" Richard asked, referring to the recent custody modification that gave David equal time with the girls. It had been Sarah's suggestion, prompted by her recognition that David had become the more consistently present parent. "It's good. Different than I expected, but good." David watched Emma showing another visitor her grandmother's painting, explaining the technique with authority she'd absorbed through osmosis. "I thought having the girls half-time would feel like losing them, but it actually feels like really having them for the first time." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Richard's been helping me understand the difference between providing for children and being present with them. I'm trying to find better balance myself." It was an admission that would have been impossible during the bitter months of their separation, when blame and recrimination had poisoned every interaction. Now, with the sharp edges of their anger worn smooth by time and therapy, they could acknowledge their mutual failures without defensiveness. "Daddy, come see this!" Emma called from the far side of the room, where she'd discovered a display of children's artwork created during the intergenerational classes Letitia had organized. Emma's own contributions hung among them, watercolor experiments that showed remarkable improvement over the past year. "These are from our family art sessions," Emma explained to a group of adults admiring the display. "Grandma teaches us that mistakes in watercolor aren't really mistakes. They're happy accidents that make the painting more interesting." David recognized the phrase, borrowed from Bob Ross, but made meaningful through Letitia's patient instruction. Over the past 2 years, their Thursday evening art sessions had become a cornerstone of their rebuilt family life, creating space for conversation and creativity that their old routines had never allowed. "Emma's become quite the teacher herself," said Mrs. Reeves, the art instructor who had first welcomed David into this world of creative vulnerability. "She has a gift for helping younger children feel comfortable making mistakes." The comment sparked a memory of Emma's panic attack over math test anxiety, her fear of disappointing the adults in her life through imperfection. Now she stood confidently among her artwork, unafraid to display pieces that showed her learning process, her willingness to experiment and sometimes fail. "Dad, can we stay for the poetry reading?" Lily asked, bouncing on her toes with excitement. One of the community center's newer programs paired visual artists with local poets, creating evenings of multimedia expression that had drawn audiences from across the city. "Of course," David replied, checking his watch. 2 years ago, he would have been calculating the time cost, weighing the value of this cultural enrichment against other productive uses of their evening. Now he simply enjoyed watching his daughters discover new forms of beauty and expression. As the formal program began, David found himself standing between his daughters, while Letitia took the small stage to introduce the evening's featured poet, a woman in her 60s, who had started writing after retiring from a career in social work. "Art," Letitia said, her voice carrying clearly through the crowded room, "teaches us that it's never too late to discover new parts of ourselves. That creativity isn't a luxury but a necessity. That the stories we tell, through paint, through words, through the ways we choose to love each other, those stories matter." She paused, her eyes finding David's across the room. "Some of the most beautiful art comes from broken places, from people who thought their lives were finished, but discovered they were just beginning a new chapter." The poet began reading, verses about reinvention and resilience, about the courage required to start over in midlife, about the unexpected joy of discovering that endings could also be beginnings. David listened with the part of his attention not occupied by the simple pleasure of standing with his daughters, watching them absorb these lessons about possibility and transformation. During the intermission, Michael Torres appeared at David's elbow, grinning broadly. "Look at you, becoming a patron of the arts," he teased. "2 years ago, you would have called this, quote, impractical leisure activity." 2 years ago, I was an idiot about a lot of things," David replied easily. "How's Sophia enjoying high school?" "She's thriving. Thanks for asking." Michael's expression grew more serious. "You know, watching you rebuild your relationship with your mom, it inspired me to have some difficult conversations with my own family. My sister and I hadn't spoken in 3 years over some stupid argument. We had dinner last week. It was a reminder that healing rippled outward, that one family's choice to do the hard work of forgiveness and growth could inspire others to examine their own relationships." David thought of all the people who had witnessed their breakdown and reconstruction. Friends, colleagues, neighbors, who had seen the cost of pride and the rewards of humility. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Reeves announced, "we'd like to close this evening with a special presentation. Letitia Williams has been working on a community mural project, and we have some images to share of the work in progress." The lights dimmed as a slideshow began, showing the transformation of an underpass that connected the community center to the park. What had once been a dank, graffiti-covered tunnel was becoming a celebration of neighborhood history and hope, painted by volunteers under Letitia's guidance. The images showed children and grandparents working side by side, teenagers who had initially been skeptical becoming invested in the project, business owners contributing materials and expertise. At the center of it all was Letitia, patient, encouraging, somehow managing to coordinate dozens of personalities and skill levels into a cohesive vision. "The mural isn't just about beautifying a space," Letitia's voice narrated over the images. "It's about proving that ordinary people can create extraordinary things when they work together. That every neighborhood has the resources it needs for renewal, it just takes someone willing to organize and inspire." David watched his mother on screen, directing a group of middle schoolers and mixing colors, her face alive with purpose and joy. When had she become this person? A community leader, an organizer, someone whose vision could transform neglected spaces into gathering places. The answer, he realized, was that she had always been this person. The capacity had always been there, waiting for the right circumstances and the courage to claim it. The art classes had been just the beginning, a doorway into a larger life that her years of self-sacrifice had deferred but not destroyed. As the program ended and people began to filter out into the cold March evening, David helped his mother gather her artwork and supplies. Emma and Lily chattered excitedly about the poetry they'd heard, already planning their own verses about family and art and the garden they were planning for spring. "Mom," David said as they loaded paintings into his car, "I need to tell you something. This whole thing, the art, the community work, the way you've created this life for yourself, it's taught me more about courage than anything I learned in business school." Letitia paused in arranging canvases, looking at him with surprise. Courage? It takes enormous courage to start over, to discover new parts of yourself at 65, to risk failure and judgment, and all the ways people might try to diminish what you're building. David's voice was quiet but firm. You've shown Emma and Lily what it looks like to value yourself, to pursue dreams even when they seem impractical. That's a gift that will shape their entire lives. And you, Letitia said gently, have shown them what it looks like to admit when you're wrong and work to do better, to choose presence over achievement, to love people more than you love being right. They stood in the parking lot for a moment, breath visible in the cold air, surrounded by the quiet satisfaction of an evening well spent. Through the community center windows, they could see the cleanup crew working, preparing the space for tomorrow's programs: senior fitness, after-school tutoring, the grief support group that Letitia had helped establish. Same time Thursday? David asked, though Thursday art sessions had become as reliable as sunrise. Wouldn't miss it, Letitia replied, though I should warn you, Emma wants to try oil paints next week. They're messier than watercolors. I think we can handle a little mess, David said, thinking of all the beautiful chaos that had emerged from their family's breakdown and reconstruction. We've gotten pretty good at cleaning up our mistakes. As they drove home through the quiet Chicago streets, Emma and Lily falling asleep in the back seat, David reflected on the strange mathematics of loss and gain. 2 years ago, he had thought his life was falling apart, his marriage ending, his relationship with his mother severed, his daughters struggling with anxiety and insecurity. Now, driving through the same neighborhoods but seeing them with completely different eyes, he understood that sometimes things had to fall apart before they could be rebuilt into something stronger, more authentic, more sustainable. The marriage hadn't been saved, but the co-parenting relationship was healthier than their marriage had ever been. His career ambitions had been scaled back, but his relationship with his daughters had deepened beyond anything he'd imagined possible. And his mother had bloomed into someone he was still discovering, someone whose courage and creativity inspired not just her own family but an entire community. At home, he carried sleeping daughters to their beds, tucking them in with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned that bedtime routines were sacred rituals, not obstacles to productivity. In Emma's room, he noticed the watercolor she'd painted the previous week, a portrait of their family that included not just David, Emma, and Lily, but also Letitia, Sarah, Richard, and even Rosa, all gathered around a table laden with food and laughter. It was an aspirational piece, depicting a harmony they hadn't quite achieved but were working toward. A family redefined not by blood or law, but by choice, by the decision to keep showing up for each other despite mistakes and misunderstandings, and the inevitable messiness of human relationships. The painting was imperfect, like all of Emma's work, like all of their lives. The proportions were slightly off, the colors didn't always stay within the lines, and some faces were more recognizable than others. But it was beautiful in its honesty, its hope, its refusal to pretend that love was neat or simple or easy. David turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to his daughter's quiet breathing, thinking about the morning's ordinary miracles waiting for them. Breakfast conversations, school stories, the after-school art session, where they would continue learning to make beautiful things from imperfect materials. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Thank you for a wonderful evening. Emma's poem about family was beautiful, just like the life you're all creating together." He typed back, "Thank you for showing us how. See you Thursday. I'll bring extra paper towels for the oil paint experiment." The response came quickly. The messiest art is often the most beautiful. Just like families. David smiled, setting his phone aside and settling into the comfortable rhythm of his evening routine. Outside, Chicago slept under its blanket of March clouds, and inside, a family that had learned to break and heal and grow and break and heal again, continued the endless, essential work of loving each other well, one imperfect, beautiful day at a time. The watercolors had been just the beginning. The real masterpiece was this: ordinary people choosing extraordinary love, creating something precious from the raw materials of forgiveness, presence, and the courage to keep trying, one brushstroke at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.